So across the last part of the Obama administration, Trump administration, as a Biden administration, you had this shift towards building in new coalitions in Asia to restore the balance. China's power relative to all its neighbors has dramatically risen. Because after all, don't forget the normalization of relations with the US began under Mrs. Gandhi. It was Rajiv Gandhi that actually began the technological military cooperation with the US. It was Mr. Vajpayee who negotiated the nuclear agreement. Let's not talk about it as much. Nor do we, I think till Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, there was no acknowledgement of the fact that India contributed in a big way to the two world wars. Every country tries to maximize its strategic autonomy.
True.
But nobody has a full strategic autonomy. Even the US does not.
Welcome to a new episode of Books and Banter, the Dialogus Digital Original Series. We have with us today one of India's foremost strategic affairs scholars, widely recognized for his work on Indian foreign policy, Asian geopolitics and maritime strategy. He's currently with the O.P. Jindal University as a distinguished professor. Please welcome Professor C. Raja Mohan. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Portia. Thank you for inviting us.
Today, sir, we will discuss your latest book, India and Rebalancing of Asia. And before we dive into the book, if you could share with us what first drew you towards strategic affairs and Asian geopolitics?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Actually, I was a science student and I'd done my master's in nuclear physics. So 1974 was the India's nuclear test. That was also the year I graduated out of my master's. So the School of International Studies in JNU at that time, that was the only place that would let you do social science research, even if you had a science degree. And I think it fitted in because there was a lot of interest in the nuclear politics, and my knowledge of nuclear physics was helpful. So I think, but I had to learn social sciences and IR when I joined the MPhil program. So I think that brought me into at a critical point when the nuclear politics became so central globally because of the proliferation issue. And through the 70s, we had the Pakistan nuclear program, Brazil, Korea, Iran is still going on. So I think this generated sufficient market, if you will, for this subject. And I think by the time I finished, then I joined the Institute of Defense Studies after my PhD, and then started focusing more on broader strategic issues, so beyond nuclear, in terms of great power relations, India's engagement with the world, India's own strategy and security. So I think that's how.
Great. Your work has consistently bridged academia, journalism and policy discourse. How have you, these three worlds in your understanding has shaped your perspective on the Indian foreign policy?
Look, I think when I started out, you had a sense of these were separate silos across the world, or even in India, even more.
In fact, back then there was no think tank culture also. Yeah.
But I think Mr. K. Subramaniam, who was the director of Institute of Defense Studies, when I joined, when he himself, when he was an administrator, he was IAS, but he did serious research on security, and he was also affiliated with the university. So he said, look, these barriers are artificial. That in the end, what you do, your work, there is a separate discipline in all of these professions, but there's a way of combining it. That if you know the basics of a particular issue, then how you explain it to an academic audience, how you explain it to a mass audience. So that is only a question of technique. But the important thing is having the ability to, get to the bottom, then explain it to larger number of people. So I think that idea that you need to synthesize, you need to get people from different disciplines. So the idea is to encourage cross-disciplinary research, thanks to Mr. Subramaniam, and I think that's what I was lucky to have worked with him.
I'm sure you must be very lucky. So India and the rebalancing of Asia, the book places India at the center of evolving Asian balance of power. What inspired you to write this book at this particular, phase?
If you look at last decade in India's foreign policy, I think two big things have happened. I think one was the deepening crisis in India's relationship with China. You remember we had at least 4 major crises. I mean, 2013, 2014, 2017, 2020.
Absolutely.
So in a way, the question of China was, compared to where we were in the 90s, building, trying to normalize relations, expanding trade, cooperation,
Right.
to one where China was now a much bigger power. And its ability to flex its military muscle against India was beginning to reflect itself. And simultaneously, we saw America wooing India because US-China relationship began to change in the same period. The US, which was a big partner on the economic and commercial side, was now beginning to talk about pivot to Asia, need to balance Chinese power. So across the last part of the Obama administration, Trump administration, one is the Biden administration, you had this shift towards building in new coalitions in Asia to restore the balance. Because quite clearly what happened in the 2010s and increasingly in the 2020s now, China's power relative to all its neighbors has dramatically risen. And China was also becoming a peer competitor for the United States.
Yeah.
Though it still doesn't match the US on global capabilities. If you take Asia alone,
Asia alone, yeah.
which in the theater balance, then I think China is quite strong. So these were new conditions, and there we saw India getting closer to the US, starting with the revival of the Quad.
Yeah.
We had the Indo-Pacific
Indo-Pacific.
framework. We had more and more defense cooperation. So in a way, the idea of how do we stabilize Asia was the principal strategic question. Because the rise of China and China's assertion, because nobody thought rise of China alone would be problem. But once China began to assert its power, then the need to balance China, need to limit some of the consequences of China's unilateralism and expansionism became important. And that was the period where India also got closer to the US.
Yeah.
So I think the context of Asia had profoundly changed, because if you go back to the 90s, where India was trying to catch up, open up its economy, reconnect with the Asian countries, normalize relationship with China.
Initial phase, yes.
A normalized relationship with the US. So it was everybody was a friend. But I think that structure began to break down somewhere in the 2010s. And I think that's where so what this book does, because India's relationship with both US and China changed profoundly. In the 2010s and the beginning of this decade. So I think it tries to map that.
I'm asking this question more as a student or a scholar of international relations. One of the most compelling aspects of your book is that you argue India is moving from post-colonial idealism towards geopolitical realism. Do you see this as a permanent transformation or still a work in progress?
Yeah, I think the direction is permanent because the context has changed. I think 80 years after independence, what are the framework in which the early early post-independent India's ideas about the world.
Right.
So we had continuous shocks in that approach, whether it was the question of a relationship with China or the question of what happened to Kashmir and the internationalization of Kashmir.
Right.
What we thought the international system would be a fair adjudicator of the dispute actually switched to one side. So the realist check began to manifest themselves in the 50s and 60s themselves. But I think the political discourse, particularly after the 60s, the radicalization of India's domestic politics, under Mrs. Gandhi, where Mrs. Gandhi turned left, she had to depend on the left forces to stay in power. And externally, it was the peak of the Third World Movement.
Right.
And you are beginning to take positions which, again, despite what you learned in the previous decade, it looked like you were back to a radical phase. But I think it's again, I think the last years of Mrs. Gandhi, early years of Rajiv Gandhi, and since then every single Prime Minister tried to move it in a more realist direction. Because after all, don't forget, the normalization of relations with the US began under Mrs. Gandhi. It was Rajiv Gandhi that actually began the technological military cooperation with the US. It was Mr. Vajpayee who negotiated the nuclear agreement. So if you see, there is a consistent direction away. But I think there is a problem. The way the policy has evolved into more realist direction, and the discourse tends to be still very emotional,
Idealistic.
and ideological rather than rooted in grounded in pragmatism and realism.
Right. Your analysis in this book has blends diplomacy, maritime strategy, economics, and political history. If you could just share with our young scholars, what was your approach in the research methodology when you wrote this book?
I think one of the problems in IR research, I think it's driven by political science. And the categories in political science, we're dealing with various ideas and
too many
categories.
subsects, yeah.
While we tend to forget how we came here historically. So I think though political science guys, just grab whatever points they like from history, but I think in the study of Indian foreign policy, I think we've neglected a historical dimension. For example, the British period is completely ignored, as if everything started in 47. While the how pre-partition India, the British Raj constructed a particular security framework, how parts of it got broken because of partition. Some things have endured. When India says, look,
Absolutely.
Nobody should intervene in the region. So there are continuities, which we don't teach ourselves or talk about it as much. Nor do we, I think, till Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, there was no acknowledgement of the fact that India contributed in a big way to the two world wars.
Right.
Both in the First World War and the Second World War. The political class simply ignored those historical, and I think to the credit of the PM, Mr. Modi, that he actually began marking the, recognizing the contribution of the Indian Armed Forces to global history.
Right.
So I think there is a greater awareness of the historical sensibility.
I think he also brings in a lot of civilizational legacy, which we have not considered to that depth. Yeah.
Much deeper history, but even modern history,
absolutely.
we are not fully integrated. So that is one part, and I think second is, there is a deep reluctance to think of the world in terms of power, though much of the political science is supposed to be about power.
Yes.
Our domestic politics, parties are fully, conscious of power, right? I mean, you have one party today aligned with, X, tomorrow they'll dump X and join Y. See, politics is the pursuit of power, but in international relations, we tend to frame it as some kind of a moral politic. While domestic, same guys who do utterly realist in a domestic political sphere, we pretend, I think, somehow international politics is a moral exercise.
Absolutely.
So I think that creates confusion, not just to our own people, but others who follow it. So I think breaking through some of that
and that impacts the policy eventually.
Yeah. So I think that what we seeing today, I think finally the purpose was really to keep it grounded. Don't get distracted by a lot of the peripheral or the superficial disturbances that come, but look at the structure, how the structure of power is changing, and what does history tell us in understanding that structure of power. After all, if you go to Nehru period, there was collaboration between India and the US to deal with China.
Exactly.
After all, Nehru's 3 treaties with Bhutan, Nepal, and Sikkim were security treaties. But those say, oh, Nehru was never into security; he was only into globalism or liberalism. But they were both. I think that's a beauty of our history. There is a realist tradition going back to ancient period, but there's also this idealist framing. So you got to see both are part of it. But I think the former, the power-centered discussion has been downgraded somewhat. I think now trying to restore some of that by thinking objectively about India's past and its current challenges.
Speaking of history and understanding India's policy decisions, you've argued that strategic autonomy and strategic partnerships are not contradictory in your book. How difficult was it to challenge the older assumptions regarding the non-alignment?
It's still, I think, because people are, it's so convenient. I mean, I think even when the policy is long moved away, it's not, for example, I mean, after all, Nehru went to the US to deal with the China problem in '62. Indira Gandhi signed a security treaty with the Soviets in 1971 to deal with when China-US came together. But we pretend that, it was all non-alignment. In fact, again, when I joined the School of International Studies in 1974, there was a big debate. That is, was the Indo-Soviet treaty non-alignment or not?
Right.
You had those who thought they were defending the government said, no, it's all non-alignment. Or very simply, whatever Ms. Gandhi says is non-alignment.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you signed a security treaty.
Yes.
So now, as today, 50, 60 years later, I think as scholars, our job is to think of it in more structural terms, in practical terms, rather than simply, repeating a slogan. That's part of the problem, and I think we're so stuck on the word alignment, non-alignment, multi-alignment, de-alignment. But the world is, you don't have to see it only in that framework. Rarely you hear the same people talk about interests. What are your interests? How you pursue interests, that's the second part. So that's where the question of strategic autonomy comes. People think it's somehow a special virtue of India. But anyone who's done IR, international relations, knows every country tries to maximize its strategic autonomy.
True.
But nobody has a full strategic autonomy. Even the US does not.
It's not possible in a world like us.
So in a world of interdependence, multiple 200 sovereigns playing the game. So the question is, how do you maximize your freedom of action?
Yeah.
But that is as simple a concept as saying birds will fly and fish will swim. But we make it as if strategic autonomy is some kind of a unique Indian characteristic. But if you look at, take Pakistan. Pakistan signed security treaties, anti-communist alliances with the US in 1954. Then it made friends with China because they had a problem with India. You had Nepal today, or Bangladesh, or small countries, Maldives, Sri Lanka. Everyone is quite happy to play the China card, which is perfectly logical. I think so. They're looking for some strategic autonomy, if you will, from India, because they don't want to be completely submerged by Indian power. So I think that's part of the natural state of being, rather than some special feature of Indian foreign policy. So that's what my argument is, but it's not easy to dispel. Everything we have to be strategic autonomy, but to do what?
To do what?
So I think that's where it doesn't get discussed. For example, how you do, that is, you must retain your freedom of action. That is about how.
Yeah.
But the what is your interest, right?
Interest.
If interest is, how do I build my economy? How do I strengthen my technological foundations? Then those are the questions. If you say, look, this is the way path forward. And within that, how do I retain the freedom of choice and actions? But I think we conflate what and how, and it becomes a mantra which has to be repeated without any meaning.
And by the time things come into play, there is domestic politics, leadership changes, and then it goes back to the same circle of thinking. Sir, one of the recurring critique of India's foreign policy is that it remains reactive rather than strategic. Does your book perhaps give Indian strategy more coherence than it actually exists in practice?
No, I think that's a long-standing critique. But I would say, if you look at last decade, India has done things which most people thought it would never do. We go back to the nuclear deal with the US. People said, look, it's going to kill India, you're going to be finished off, your strategic autonomy will disappear, independent foreign policy will disappear. But the government moved across two different parties, both the UPA and the NDA. Both worked, eventually in separate ways, but to get the deal done with the Americans, because there was a recognition you had to get out of the nuclear jailhouse. Because the NPT and the post-1974 restrictions put you in a situation. So I don't think, the discourse tends to be reactive, but I think policy, I would say, last decade plus, has become more active, proactive. The second thing, for example, on free trade, where we started in the 90s by saying, look, we will integrate with Asia. But 2019, you withdrew from RCEP, the regional agreement, because of the China factor. And if you see last 2 years, we've negotiated trade agreements all with the Western countries, because that's where more complementarity is. So I think policy change, I think there is agency, there is active foreign policy, but it's slow. You can say, look, India, nobody's accused India of being too fast. But I think as a large country, I think it has adapted, it is adapting to the new realities. Whether the speed and scope of it is good enough, we could argue. The challenges most of the time are not in the foreign policy domain, but actually in the domestic domain. Are you reforming your economy fast enough? Are you willing to modernize your defense doctrine? Are you willing to modernize your defense bureaucracy? Are you ready to
pass the right bills?
So that's why the inertia is not at the foreign policy level. The inertia is at the economic policy, strategic policy level. But on the other critique, one other critique that has come for the book is, your book was written just before Trump came back to power, therefore it's all over. I think it's very interesting. We have President Trump going in the middle of May to Beijing.
Right.
So in a way, it was Trump who starts the idea, very vigorously, China is a problem, and therefore we need to modernize the Quad, we need to, in fact, the Indo-Pacific framework also came under Trump 1. Now, has Trump's second term, the way he talks about China and Russia, has it changed fundamentally? That's one question.
Absolutely.
My own sense is, I make that argument in the concluding chapter. Look, I think the contradictions between China and US are deep and structural.
Sure.
So I think we need to navigate that new situation. That doesn't mean what India and US have done for the last 25 years is simply going to disappear. Those impulses are going to disappear. Or the problems that have accumulated in the India-China relationship are going to be simply sorted out. For example, we just now, China has accepted that it supported Pakistan in the Ops Hindu. So those realities have not changed. You see, our structural security problem with China, our need for building coalitions with other powers, our need to modernize our defense and security, those have not disappeared. Now, within that, how much role would the US play? Is the US is not the only actor? Suddenly we see India now moving closer to Europe, for example. Our Prime Minister, just as Xi Jinping is going to receive Mr. Trump when Mr. Modi is traveling to Europe. So I think the one thing I think we often forget is the relationships between the major powers. Always in a flux. It's not that you, for your rest of your life, you're assumed or you're assured that here is the relationship. If you look at last 100 years, the relationship between US and Russia has changed so many times.
True.
They were allies in the Second World War. They were enemies in the Cold War. They were buddies in the post-Cold War period. Now they're enemies again. US-China. In fact, US was the biggest supporter.
Clear phases.
So US was the biggest supporter of Chinese nationalism when it was fighting Japanese imperialism. Then they fell out. Then they came together. Then they fell out. Now we don't know where they're going. So I think we must be prepared for that uncertainty. Often I think part of our discourse, the problem is, you're not prepared for uncertainty. You just talk about yourself and you say everything else should be
according to my choices, correct.
So I think the world, you can't will your external world. You have to deal with the external world. But understanding, for example, what is common between US and Russia, how much of it will endure, or what is common between US and China and what is not common between. So we have to make that assessments on the basis of our own logic. And I think that's what part of being grown up. Part of being an actor in the international system.
Absolutely. In emphasizing China's role in reshaping Asia, do you think there is a risk of reducing India's strategic choices to a China-centric framework?
No, I think there's no escaping China's dominance, not just anymore in Asia, but across the world. Today, China's space capabilities, China's capabilities in the polar domain in Arctic and Antarctic. Americans are trying to push them out of Latin America. It's going to be taking a lot of work. So we are next door. So in a way, as I said, Chinese economy at $20 trillion is bigger than its neighbors put together. That is, Japan is at around 4 point something, India is at 4, ASEAN is around 4. We still put together don't match the Chinese capability. Second, Chinese are spending so much on defense. So I think this is what I think the central feature. How we deal with it is a different problem. China has risen to be the second largest economy, second most important military power, and its influence around its neighborhood has dramatically risen. You can see it in our own. They're selling arms to all our neighbors. All our neighbors are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They're going to be increasingly seen in the Indian Ocean. And today, for example, India started out after Galwan. Okay, we'll cut off Chinese technology imports or Chinese foreign direct investment. But 5 years later, you still have to go back to, you get some Chinese investment. This is, for example, on exports. Whatever India exports is a major priority for us. All your manufactured exports involve Chinese components. So while the problems with China remain, your trade deficit with China has dramatically grown. So I think that is a reality. Now the question is, how do we deal with this reality? Is the bigger problem. That doesn't mean this will be forever. But right now, Chinese economic weight, Chinese military weight, are the key features of Asian geopolitics.
Right. Last question, sir. If you were to write a sequel today, what would be the central question you would explore?
Are you talking only about Asia or?
I mean, this particular theme, geopolitics in Asia.
No, I think what I would say, I mean, I'm not a specialist on Middle East, but I would love to see, we've been focused on East, in fact, the book doesn't cover the Middle East at all. Here, I think I would say, if you see last few years, I mean, the transformation of India's relations with the Gulf Arabs, increasingly now we're going to do the Africa Summit. So I would say we've not done enough strategic thinking on our relationship with the Middle East and with East Africa. So I think paying more attention to this side of the equation. We are in the middle of Asia, we're in the middle of the Indian Ocean. But last decade, 2 decades the focus has been on the look east. So I would say, look, I would love to write a book on looking west. How is the geopolitics changing? What happens if the US withdraws? What happens if the Chinese become a major player in the Gulf? Today, everyone talks about Americans as the guardian of the Gulf the Hormuz Strait. What if China becomes the guardian? So I think there are very interesting questions there. Can we work with the Europeans? How do we work with the local countries? There's a question of, are you willing to provide security assurances to your neighbors in the Gulf?
Yes.
So these are questions we've avoided. We simply say, look, we don't want to get drawn into the messy complexity of the Middle East. But whether you might not want to get in, but I think you're going to be drawn in. So I think there is a case, for a solid realist discourse on the Middle East and the west of India.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being on Books and Banter. It was lovely talking to you on your latest book.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.